Welcome, Leo Caldwell, to the Empathy Edge podcast. This has been a while in the making, and I'm so excited to finally talk with you after fangirling you on LinkedIn for the longest time. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so interested in your work and, more importantly, interested in your life. So tell us a little bit about your story. And, from your story, it'll be pretty clear how you've gotten to the work that you're doing now. But tell us about what it is that you are doing now and give us a little bit of background into who you are.
So I grew up in the Midwest, and I actually grew up Pentecostal, which is very evangelical, very conservative. And I was really all in Pentecostal. I loved it. I loved the religion until we started talking about queerness. And I realized, oh no, I like women. And at the time, I was a woman. I was assigned female at birth, and then transitioned in my early 20s. But at the time, I didn't even know what it meant to be trans. So I just knew, okay, I'm queer. This religion does not align with my values, my belief system as a human. How do I navigate that? And I always say that losing that religion was my first heartbreak because I was so in it and so passionate about it, up until the point where, the messaging around being queer was just basically you're going to burn in hell, and there wasn't much you could do about it. And so from that point, I was just looking for home and a family, because my family is extremely religious. So in my early 20s, I started going to the gay bar. This is, the early aughts, so 2003-ish. Not a lot of information in the media about what it means to be trans. Really didn't understand the concept of a trans man. So again, just kind of saw myself as this like butch lesbian. So wasn't really sure even of what was possible. And that's something, as I do trainings and conversations with people, they keep talking about all these new identities. And I'm like, no, it's not new identities. People exist. They just don't know what's possible. And we're like creating language for possibility. And I lived that experience of just not knowing what was possible. So yeah, I started meeting trans people in the queer club, and I was like, okay, this is a thing, and this is actually probably more what aligns with who I am and how I feel. But there were still a lot of obstacles in 2003 to getting care, to finding out what it even means. What does it look like? I actually, would order books. I think Amazon was around then, but I would order books on the internet, and read things. Jameson Green was one of the first books I read, and now we're connected on LinkedIn. And I also had like that fangirl is what I still call myself moment. But I just consumed as much as I could to find out about what it means to be trans. And then I was in college, and so I had access to care through the campus. But it took me a while. I actually, through this process, dropped out of school because I was coming out to my parents and they weren't accepting, and just like going through all this like really emotional stuff. And so college was not a priority. It was like, let's get through this. Let's become who I want to become. And from that, I worked two jobs, worked at PetSmart and Blockbuster, which when I say Blockbuster, people are like, how old are you? And so I worked those two jobs, and was like, man, I can't do this. I got to go back to school at some point. So I went back to school. And that's when I accessed care. The first time around, I did it. The second time, so it was 2007, and I actually was the first person on campus, actually at Ball State, to access hormone treatments in their clinic. And the director of the clinic was like, "Hey, you're going to kind of be an experiment, but I have been going to sessions, and I do have an understanding." Yeah, and so it was very. It was scary, but it was really exciting, and I felt supported. At the time, though, I actually just wanted to have top surgery, which is a double mastectomy, but I wasn't able to access that without taking the hormones. So the standards of care have changed quite a bit, and people are more empowered in their own journey. So anyways, get all this care, get this kind of support at school. I ended up going into journalism. So I worked in a newsroom. I got my first job when I was still a junior in college. So my last part of my junior year and my senior year, I was working full time at the local newspaper. Still not out in the workplace. Didn't feel comfortable to be out. Again, this is 2007 to 2009-ish. I had heard a lot of transphobic jokes in the newsroom, so clearly it wasn't a place that I was, going to do that.
So I have a question. So you were already going through gender affirming healthcare, but at work, you were still presenting as a woman.
Yeah, I was
Wow.
definitely.
So how did that impact you of sort of having to lead those two lives?
Mhm. It was very strange, but also kind of used to it with my family, right? My family
Mm,
kind of had this expectation of me living two lives. And over time, as I've come out to more and more people, one of the things that have really changed is like I've had to either hide or lie a lot. And now, like, even I'm not even into like white lies, right? You know, like if someone asks me, does this dress look good? I'll be like, no, because I've spent so much of my early life having to lie about things that lying feels really awful. And so in the workplace, what was interesting is I was already struggling because I was in the Midwest and I was a butch lesbian, and I felt that there wasn't a lot of camaraderie. I felt like people didn't know how to interact with me because I didn't fit into gender boxes already.
mhm.
Um, and so I was already cautious and kind of like, oh, I don't know that these are my people. But what was interesting is I actually worked in for Gannett, and so they own several newspapers. And I transitioned. I was physically, literally changing, and people really weren't sure what was going on, and I wasn't coming out. But my boss at the time got moved to a paper in New Jersey, and he was like, "Hey, we want to hire you to come out here and be an editor," which was a big step up for me. But I was like, look, if I come out there, I just got to tell you something. Like, I go by Leo, I want to use male pronouns, and I don't want anyone to know about who I was before. And he was very supportive. And it was just interesting because within 2 weeks, I went from being a woman in the workplace to a man in the workplace. And that
Yeah.
was incredible. Like, in a really incredible in the sense of like, yes, every experience a woman says she's had in the workplace, I validate and I experienced. And when you're a man, it's a whole different situation. I felt seen, I felt heard. I got promoted within a year once I was there. It was just before I would sit at like a table where we'd make decisions and I would say something and kind of felt like people my word didn't have weight, you know. And then as a male presenting person in those spaces, it's like I would say something and it was the gospel. So it was just a really big transformation. And then I lived in the workplace stealth for 2 years. So no one knew I was trans at that point, and I wasn't out. Professionally, and I wasn't out personally out on the East Coast. So I did this little stealth thing for a while, but it really felt really not authentic to me, and sort of like what I was saying with my parents, like I was lying still, which
Mhm.
some trans people, that's how they live their life, and they're happy to do that. They're happy to not be, out, and that's
Mhm.
fine. But for me, I really wanted people to know. And I ended up leaving news because journalism and newspapers were struggling, and there was just lots of layoffs, and I was like, yeah, I didn't want to be in New Jersey anymore. And so I ended up in the instructional design, e-learning, corporate training world. And
Mhm.
that's when I really started getting inspired to do something about the workplace and trans inclusivity.
Right.
So that being in corporate America and kind of seeing how it functions was like, oh,
Right.
I need to say something.
Well, and so many things about your story. One, the concept of you being able to be male and female in the workplace genuinely and understand the difference in how you were treated is so validating as a woman, right? And I've heard a TEDx speaker, I think her name is Paula Stone. I'm not 100% sure. I will fact check that and I will put the correct link in the show notes. But she was a corporate executive for a Christian leaning organization, like a large organization, as a man, and
Mm,
then transitioned and became a woman, or not became a woman. She was a woman, I think, the whole time, but and talked in her TEDx talk about all the differences that she experienced being at work as a man and then when she became a woman. And she's
mm,
like, I felt like all of a sudden people thought I was dumb
yeah.
because I was a woman, right? When I was a man, I knew just as much when I was presenting as a man, but somehow that was invalidated. So that is super interesting that you have that perspective, and what a muscle of empathy that you now have being on both sides of that fence. Like,
Mm,
that is amazing. And number two, the fact that you came now to work where you are educating and advocating for the trans community. I think many cisgendered people have this image that every transgendered person wants to do that with their profession. And they don't necessarily. They want to be doctors, lawyers, photographers, journalists as well. So can you talk a little bit more about that decision to make that your work now
Mhm.
versus the work that you had loved before?
Yeah, so I loved being a journalist, to your point. I loved it. I loved being in the newsroom. I felt like though I had to leave that anyways. And so the space I started working in wasn't one of a passion. And I was already kind of feeling like, man, I'm not doing something I love. And then there was a trans youth over in Ohio, Leela Acorn. She threw herself in front of a semi. This is 2014, end of the year. And she passed away, and she left a note. I think it was on Tumblr. It was on one of her blogs, and it basically was like, "I'm doing this thing because the world isn't ready for us. Please fix society." And when I saw that, I was like, "Yeah, like this. I need to speak up." I was thinking I was like 32, 31. I'm an adult. Like I have privilege. I have an income. I'm white. Like I need to start saying stuff and educating people. And so I reached out to my former editor and I was like, hey, can I start writing a column for the paper? Because my thought was the audience for a newspaper is older, primarily white, primarily, wealthier, like higher middle class. And I was like, this is an audience that needs to know this is happening and needs to know about trans people. And so
Mm-hmm.
I started writing a blog, or I'm sorry, a column. And it got a really great reception actually, and I got a lot of older, like 70, 60-year-old readers reaching out and saying, hey, I never knew a trans person, thank you for your column. And it was really me talking about like, oh, here's some of my experience, but here's what it's like to be trans, here's what it's like, this is what gender is doing to all of us. Because to your point, like getting the empathy and understanding of what gender does both to women and men now, it's really eye-opening. The gender binary can really screw us all up. And so kind of preaching that gospel of like, hey, this isn't just about trans people. Like we are in a system that's really limiting to both gender, both binary genders that exist that we talk about.
Absolutely. Now, you have talked about the fact that Gen Z is the queerest, most gender diverse generation.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about that and what that means for the workplace?
Yeah, so I actually teach in higher ed, so I get to interact with a lot of Gen Zers. And in fact, in 2021, Gallup put out a poll that said that 1 in 6 Gen Zers indicate being queer or transgender. And in another survey, over half of Gen Z respondents believe that there are more than two genders. So if you're interested, Pew has a lot of data on Gen Z, and so it's a great resource. But what I'm finding and what I'm seeing amongst my students, what I'm hearing when I talk to organizations, is that there's this expectation now that folks in the workplace understand that it's not a binary gender system anymore. It's not just men and women. And what I think a lot of people don't understand too is Gen Z they're in their late 20s now. So they're in the workplace. Like this is a group of people that are like 14 to like mid 20s.
Well, I always
So
laugh when people talk about millennials. I'm like, millennials are in their 40s now. Like they're leading their
right.
VPs and up. Yeah.
Yeah, like everybody thinks millennials are still in their 20s,
Yeah,
and they don't
exactly.
understand like Gen Z is the generation that's entering, they're the new talent, they're the people you're recruiting, and
Right.
your space is not clearly set up in a way that it supports more than two genders. I think this generation, not everyone in the generation, but a big portion has an expectation that it will be.
Mm-hmm.
So I think how it changes the landscape, I think one Gen Z is changing the workplace in a lot of ways and have a
Yes,
lot of different expectations. But as it
absolutely.
relates to gender, I think that there's an expectation that facilities like bathrooms or group settings are less gendered, right? And so that there's more gender neutral options. I think that there's an expectation that if you want to transition on the workplace, like what are the policies and procedures in place? Because that's the other thing when I was in the workplace. I didn't know what you did to transition. I didn't know how to like do that. Like, and so like they want some sort of structure around that. I think that there's also this desire to see allyship in the workplace, to see that your workplace actually does stand up and is vocal on issues. you know, like there's a lot of anti-trans legislation right now, to see that your workplace actually will speak up on that and actually indicate, hey, you know what, we see this is happening. We know this is also your mental health is affected by this. This is what we're doing. And a lot of times I think what it is, it's flexibility around work schedule. I think it's flexibility on time off. But yeah, I think Gen Z is going to do, actually, I'm really excited. I think they're going to do incredible things for
Oh,
the
they're gonna be phenomenal. And I hate putting the burden of like, can you help us fix this on them? You know, I'm a Gen Xer,
world.
and I know, even when our generation was put upon a, you guys are gonna fix everything, right? And then we didn't. So, I
Yeah.
hate putting that pressure on them, especially given all the mental health challenges that that generation is currently facing. But I just find this really interesting. Now, I would love your perspective, because those in the country and in the world who are anti-trans seem to have this belief that just because you're exposed to gender fluidity, it means you're automatically going to choose that,
Right.
right? That it's the exposure that
Mhm.
makes you trans.
Right.
Can you rant on that for a little
Yeah.
for me?
Yeah.
I mean, can you tell me the reality of like, you either feel that way or you don't, right? I
Right.
mean, it's
Mhm.
just, it's not a question of, I didn't feel that way before, but now I got exposed to this and I'm like, I'm going to
Mhm.
try that. It's not
Right.
a fad. So
Right.
can you speak to that a little bit about maybe even your frustration in that way of thinking?
Yeah, yeah, and I think, you know, when I do say to folks in trainings, Gen Z is the most gender diverse and queer generation, they're kind of like, well, yeah, probably, you know, like it's a trend, it's a phase or whatever. I'm like, no, there's a couple reasons. One, that they're more queer people, more trans people. It used to be illegal. Like, I mean, straight up, that's, you know, like if we
Yeah.
look at the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and like all the raids on gay bars, you couldn't dress as the opposite sex even if you wanted to, and so it was an opportunity to even express yourself. And so this generation hasn't grown up in a time really where I don't even think they have that knowledge. Like my generation, your generation, we did at least have that knowledge, so there was still
Hmm.
that fear. So I think there were a lot of generations and folks that haven't come out because of one legal reasons back before us, but
Right.
then the fear of what could happen. And then the what I was saying earlier, the possibility, right? If you don't know something's possible, if you don't know that something exists, you can't be it. And so back to like representation, right, in the media.
Hmm.
I didn't see a trans man on TV in the 90s. I didn't know that they existed. I didn't even know it was possible. I knew I did not feel like a woman, but I didn't know what that meant. I didn't have a
Hmm.
framework for that. And I think that that's the problem, is that a lot of people, my generation and generations before me, we didn't even have the language to use. I mean, for
Hmm.
me now, even I look back and I'm like, if I would have had the word non-binary, would I have done that instead? You know, like, because I have the word genderless actually tattooed on my spine. And so like that word, the non-binary didn't even exist when I got that
Right.
tattoo.
Right.
And so again, it's not, we're not creating new identities, and we're not create people are not
No.
coming up of nowhere and like trying something. And I will say this, maybe young people are trying, maybe they are experimenting. So what? That's great.
Right.
Like, what's the harm in that? When we're young,
Mhm.
we all do, are, you know, figuring out who we are, trying to find
Yes.
identity. And now
Yeah.
we allow the possibility of, hey, figuring out identity could also include your gender, you know?
Right. Right. But I also think that that thinking of, because part of the fear that they cite is if you get exposed to the right terminology and the role models, you will become that. And
Mhm.
it doesn't mean that, because if that's not genuinely who you
Right,
are and
right.
who you identify as, you won't. But the reason, like you said, the reason there seem to be so many more transgender folks in the world, queer folks, is because they probably were always there. They just could never shine their light.
Yeah.
They were never
Yeah.
allowed to be who
Yeah.
they were.
And I mean, I know so many people that have tons of friends that are queer, and so many Gen Zers that are surrounded by queer kids that are not queer. And I don't think that, yeah, trans, being queer, it's not something that transfers from
Yeah.
person to person.
Yeah.
I think
Right.
that either you have a part of yourself that has already felt that way,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe it's a part you didn't, it took some time to discover too. So there are
Mm-hmm.
people that do come out later in life that
Mm-hmm.
kind of didn't know for sure. But again, being around other folks that are like that, it doesn't transfer to you, but it just reinforces
Something
that.
clicks, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I remember. So I interviewed on the show Corey Lovejoy, and I'll put a link to Corey's episode in the show notes. But she talked about the fact that for the longest time, living her life as a man, got married, had kids, didn't come out until recently. Um, but always felt like she was mentally ill. That was the feeling she always had, that something wasn't right about her, right? And not everybody grows up that way.
Right.
So I think that that's an important thing of, we're talking about people who now have an outlet and a language and a name and a community for what they were already feeling. Just because we didn't acknowledge it before, or society didn't acknowledge it before, it doesn't mean they weren't already feeling that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always what I take away, is that we can't say there are more people because we talk about things more, and there's more books, and there's more characters on TV and in movies. That's not the core, that's not the causation
Right.
of it, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about what is going on in our country, in our world. You and I were talking about the fact that there's a site called translegislation.com that has an anti-trans bills tracker. And I was stunned to see in black and white some of the numbers, that over 550 bills, anti-trans bills, have been introduced this year in 49 states. 83 have passed, 104 have failed, and 369 are active. We hear about this all the time in the news. We hear about everything from receiving healthcare to book banning to legal recognition. How does that? We're not here to dissect the legislation, or the hearts and minds of the people that are trying to get these things passed. What I would love to know, and I think what listeners would love to know, is, for you as a transgender man, how does that impact your life on a daily basis? And how does it impact you in the workplace?
Yeah. Yeah. So just logistically, right? One of the things I've been doing lately is, what states have what passed? Because I'm traveling for work, I'm traveling to speak in different states. And I'm like, okay, where does my plane land for a layover? So just the logistics and that mental energy of, I need to know what's going on in each state that I'm going to visit and be aware. And that's another, again, like, as far as, like, if you think about this as an employee, right? The resource, the mental resource that I'm using and energy I'm using to now figure this out is taking away from other things I could be doing, right? And so the emotional labor, the mental labor around just keeping track of what's happening with over 500 bills, it's very difficult to keep track of what's happening in our country around my identity and who I am and where I can move freely in the world. So I think just logistically, it's become really time consuming. And then emotionally, I've been tracking what I feel is important to me that affects me. I think all of it affects me emotionally though. And so that's why I've kind of stepped back. I mean, I do a lot of education around this, so I do have to be aware. But I do have to step back from it because it's really discouraging to see adults in positions of power spending so much of their time and energy on a very small portion of the American population that really have just been existing, not doing much. We're not really like doing anything, beyond transforming who we are. And then we're getting attacked, and it's like, why?
Well, and I saw this great, it was one of those bittersweet but ironic and funny memes that was out there that said, you know, I don't I don't see drag queens going into schools and killing kids by beating them over the head with copies of To Kill a Mockingbird. So what fight are we fighting?
Mhm. Yeah.
Like, we should be fighting against guns and violence and all of these things, not this, right? This is not where our biggest problems are.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like literally, I'm in the Midwest. It was, the air was not very breathable from the fires in Canada. Like things are going on. Like look at the pictures from New
Things
York
are
City
happening. Yeah.
yesterday. Like that's it's very discouraging. And I think that even if you aren't an advocate of trans people, you should be pissed off that our legislators are spending the time and energy to take away existing rights that trans people already have. For what? Instead of using their energy and time towards things that could really help
Right. To
move the
solve
needle.
homelessness or
Yeah.
crime or drug addiction or
Yeah.
all of these other environmental issues, right? All of these other things. So I love what you said, because I don't want to gloss over that. The fact that if you want to just look at like dollars and cents and bottom line productivity, the mental energy that you have to expend as an employee on your safety, on these issues, on understanding that is taking away from innovating for the company. That is
Mhm.
taking away, not that you don't deliver great work, but the point is, do you really want a portion of your workforce dealing with something that's going to distract them from the work? I hear a lot, in the whole debate of return to office and return to work, that some leaders are absurdly concerned with the fact that if you are working from home and I can't see you, you might be spending your time distracted by playing Minecraft or watching TV. They're worried about that,
Mhm.
but they're not worried about you being distracted by the fact that your person might be in danger. Your
Mhm.
life might be in danger if you go somewhere. You might get attacked. There might be a law against your lifestyle in a place where your company sends you on business. Like,
Mhm.
that to me is just crazy.
Yeah. No, I used to work as a project manager too. I've done a lot of things. And so in that mindset, we had this 85% capacity billable, a number. So all the employees had to bill 85% of their time. So that's what I'm thinking, like, okay, as an employee that now has, like, I couldn't bill 85 because I would have to do too much research on, okay, now this client is in this place. And so just the time, like you're saying, just logistically and the time spent at work
Yeah.
figuring this stuff out, but then add on the emotional part. Like if something
Right.
really big passed in my state, like if something like in Florida, like now in Florida, I can't go to the men's restroom. I could be asked to leave the men's restroom looking very masculine. And if I don't leave, I could be arrested. If that happened in Indiana, if I saw that news, my work, I would be done for the day. I would be done because I would be devastated and I wouldn't know. I'm like, okay, how do I go to a restaurant and, go to the restroom? And so I would be, the fear too, takes away from your workday as well. Yeah. So it's definitely something I think leaders should be worried about and talk about. And I think leaders should be proactive. What can we do? And
Mm-hmm.
understand that the mental health of trans and gender nonconforming employees
Mm-hmm.
it's not great this year. I mean, it's
Right.
not, yeah.
Right. What are, in your work, as you go into companies and talk and do some trainings, what are some of the things you have seen companies doing to support the transgender community? Can you give us some examples?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I love is what I was saying earlier. They have very clear policies around transitioning. So if you're at the workplace, this is what you would do if you want to transition. And that's so important because trans people have a really high rate of poverty and unemployment. And if there's the National Center for Transgender Equality has a lot of great surveys around this. But basically, uh, whenever you have to transition, that becomes a threat to your job, really. Your identity is changing, your name is changing. So how do you transition? Like if you have clients, how does that go through gracefully, And so just having the company take that burden off of the employee is amazing, to say, okay, this is what we do, this is how we make it seamless. It's really, really awesome. The other thing is just being really vocal about their support of their trans employees. I actually had an employer that when Trump put out the trans military ban, I think it was 2017, basically saying that trans people can't serve in the military anymore. And I'm not in the military, but they sent me a card because they knew that news just sucks. So they sent me a
Right.
letter, little card, and they would do that anytime something happened. And that just is that emotional connection, that like we're talking about empathy, that empathetic connection, that I was like, wow, that meant a lot to me. And I think that showing up in that way for employees is really awesome. And covering trans related healthcare, right? So making sure your insurance covers hormones, covers surgeries. That's a really, really big one. It takes a lot of burden off the employee.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and I love that those go beyond, like, we put out a post on social media, during Pride Month that
Yeah.
says, hey, we support the transgender community.
Yeah.
These are the things I always talk about in terms of companies and leaders walking their talk
Mm,
when it comes to empathy, when it comes to emotional intelligence, when it comes to actual support.
mhm,
How are you operationalizing that? I
mhm,
want to just real quickly on your point about like guidelines for transition or a process for transition. What can a leader do who's listening to this and says, I would love to do that in my workplace? And right now, I in my network don't know anyone who's trans, and there's not that I know of anyone in our company who's trans. Who can they get input from
mhm.
on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great freelancers, consultants that do this work. I've done this work because I haven't implemented a transition policy, but I actually did a lot of work previously as a trainer and worked with a lot of corporations around like HR policies or sales training. So like I have that previous experience and that lived trans experience. So you're looking for somebody to come in and consult, right? Especially if you that's trans for sure. That's number one, and has some sort of experience around creating policies and procedures within a company. And so LinkedIn's awesome. It's a great place to find these folks. Like I said, I do the work. I know other consultants that do the work, and we're out there. And it's really important to get, like I said, you have to get trans people in the room to have these conversations because if you don't, you're not going to create policies, you're not going to create advocacy work that really means anything if you don't have those voices in the room.
I love that. And also, like you said, you have to have that community that you are trying to support be part of the solution. It's not about doing things, quote unquote, for people. It's about doing things with people and ensuring that, again, there's things we as potentially cisgender or even gay or gay people that might not understand the transgender community. Just because someone's gay doesn't mean they understand what it's like to be transgender, right?
Sure.
So I think keeping that in mind, that even with all these different identities, if we're really trying to support this in the workplace, we want to make sure we're making folks that are part of that population part of the process or the policy that we build. Now, that's great for policy building, but what are some strategies they can employ to change mindsets? Because what if there is discomfort and fear in their workplace? Let's say you've got a CEO who's doing this from the top, who is like, yes, I want to create a workplace. I want to be able to attract Gen Z talent, and I want to create a workplace that's inclusive and supportive of the transgender community. What if they're dealing with a lot of issues in their ranks in terms of, because you can hire people and you can create policies, but how do you really make the transgender individuals feel included?
Yeah.
So
No, that's
what are some strategies there?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of opportunity. One, I think sometimes there's like buckets of people, right? There's folks that are just totally don't know anything about the community, don't have any feelings about the community, but just very uneducated, right? And then there's people that are educated, advocates, awesome. And then there's really just people that I don't know. They're not aligned with they are very anti-trans, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think
For
that
whatever
becomes
reason, right? Yeah.
right. And those people to me become an HR issue more than anything and more of a like one-on-one coaching situation. And I don't think you reach them through strategy or training or I think that is like having a racist person in the workplace, right? And
Mhm.
how would you deal with that? Um, and right now we're at a spot of gender transformation that I think that you're either going to be a proactive leader or you're going to be reactive, and you're going to be reactive soon. Like in the next, if you haven't done something in the next few, like 2 or 3 years, it's now reactive. So to be proactive right now is to look at your people that are, you have your group that's uneducated. And I honestly would suggest some simple training. Like I would treat this like I would one of my previous clients in corporate training of, let's just give everybody a baseline knowledge of what this even means, and some just basic understanding, and then what it means in our organization. What does that look like, and how do we value this and incorporate it into values? And a lot of people just roll this under obviously their DEI values. And you're creating an inclusive workplace. And so just that messaging, but being really specific about it and calling out trans people and not just assuming because you say gender identity, sexual orientation, you're like checking that box, right? I think that's really important in the value messaging that you're sharing. Yeah, because I've worked within a company that had all these inclusive values, but the reality is they never really wanted to talk about queerness or LGBTQ plus. And so I brought that out and I called it out in a DEI meeting, and I was told that they didn't want to make people uncomfortable. And so that made me very uncomfortable because
Right.
I was like, okay, then I don't want to work here. Like,
Right. Because you're saying I don't exist. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. And so I worked with them for a few months and tried to change that, but it just kept that there was a message back to me and I left. And when I left, I got hired by another place that they're like, you're a unicorn. And I'm like, yeah, I know, I'm great. Like I'm awesome. I know a lot of things. Like, but the other place just was unwilling to have those specific words come out of their mouth, which
Hmm.
very, very obvious, like a red flag to me that you won't say LGBTQ plus, you won't say trans, but
Hmm.
you'll talk about being inclusive. That's not inclusive to not say those words.
No, absolutely not. Where are some good resources for, let's say there's individuals and, I count myself in this group of continuing to try to educate ourselves on the different terminology, on different issues important to the trans community. Are there any websites or publications that you recommend people can go to educate themselves?
Yeah. So one book that I love is by Judith Butler called Breaking the Bowl. And it might be bowls, but just she does a great job of just breaking gender down in general. So it's not even just really specific about transness, but it does talk about that. And it's older. It's like 15, 20 years older, but it's really, really good. And then as far as the web, there's Erin Reed is a trans journalist, and she's doing really comprehensive coverage of what's happening in our nation. And her blog is Erin in the Morning, and she has a spreadsheet called Leagy Alerts. And I think it's linked from her website, and it literally breaks every legislation down by state. So it's amazing. As far as workplace stuff, I mean, honestly, Harvard Business Review has been doing a lot of stuff. HRC is always really great to see what's going on. They just actually put out a message 2 days ago that they've declared a state of emergency for LGBTQ plus folks in America, and they produced a guidebook about what that means and how to navigate, and if you are traveling, and so it's really good. Yeah.
What was that again? HRC
Yeah,
for folks listening.
Human Rights Campaign,
Got it.
and they put out a guidebook, and National Center for Transgender Equality. They do the big survey that they did a survey in 2015, the largest survey of trans people. They're issuing their 2023 or their 2022 survey, which is their updated survey here in 2023,
Mhm.
and it's got so much data about workplace. So
Mhm.
it's really good to see how we're doing in the workplace.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. And we'll put those links in the show notes as well. So, um, my last question is sort of a bigger one, but what do you wish most people knew about being transgender? What is sort of either the biggest myth or the biggest misconception?
I think one thing that people in the workplace, I will say, I think we're kind of like superheroes, like because we actually we have a very unique perspective, and I don't know a single trans person that isn't extremely talented, emotionally intelligent. Like we've had to do so much inner work that it's given us a really strong awareness of who we are, but also how we interact with other people. And I know I can't speak for every trans person, but most trans people I've met, I think that are just incredible people as far as their work ethic, but also just their emotional intelligence. And I think in general, most of us are really boring. Like we're just like everybody else. Like I just think there's like this sensationalized
Yes.
version of who we are. I mean, all of like most of my trans friends have kids, they have a mortgage, they have a 401k,
They're
they have
paying
they're
taxes. Like
doing the
it's,
things.
yeah.
Yeah, we've just living our lives.
Well,
Like,
this is the thing I always get upset about when people are homophobic. They just assume gay people are having sex all the time, like every moment of the day,
right,
that's what
yeah,
they're doing. And I'm
right,
like, no, they're going
right,
to work, they're
right.
cleaning the bathroom, they're
Just
making
doing
dinner. Like
right.
they're living
Yeah,
their lives.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, getting into gardening, mowing, like I'm doing
Yes.
like it's very, yeah, it's just not I think that there, especially now with all this legislation, there is this messaging that we're out, one, recruiting people, which we're not,
Right. Right.
and that we're
And
just
you're just leading depraved lives all
yeah,
over the place. Yeah.
yes, yeah,
Not true. Not true. Okay. But I do like how you describe that of like, many of us are kind of boring.
yeah.
Well, Leo, this has been so wonderful to connect with you, and you've shared so much great insight and resources. I will link to everything you've shared in the show notes. Um, you will have your contact information and your website in the show notes as well. But for folks listening on the go, where's the best place they can find out more about you or get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. If you search Leo Caldwell, I think I come up pretty quickly. So find me there and
Mhm.
connect with me there.
Awesome. And your posts are great on LinkedIn. So I second the following you on LinkedIn. Thank you again for your time. And I love that we've connected.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you, everyone, for listening to another great episode of the Empathy Edge podcast. If you like what you heard, you know what to do. Please rate and review and share it with a colleague or a friend. Until next time, please remember that cash flow, creativity, and compassion are not mutually exclusive. Take care and be kind.